Good evening, blog viewers. Tonight we'll circle back to the virtue of love, and we'll talk about actually self-love, an important foundational building block for any sort of genuine love outside of the self, whether of a friend, romantic interest, or even hobbies of some sort or another. Self-love always has to be there for us to be able to engage in that sort of external love of any other person, friend, or interest of any sort. It's hard to imagine anyone that does not find anything lovable within himself or herself to be capable of loving anything else outside the self. Where is that person to generate any love if there is no love within? Obviously, we can all imitate sort of conceptions or images or models of love that we find all around us circulating with other people or in movies or in certain conceptions we've always had. But one can sort of imitate in that way only for so long. If the love is actually, if we don't have the self-love within, we can't persist in that imitation for very long. And obviously, as we saw in Nietzsche's ideas, any imitation is inauthentic and is in some way or other a bad copy and is likely to be self-defeating in that sense. So the lack of love within the self, if that doesn't exist and we imitate, it will the love that we show other people or other activities we're engaged in, it will kind of lack a sort of zest or creativity that probably would have been there had we cultivated more self-love. And so for all these reasons, I think self-love is very important as sort of a flow through internally to flow out into the external world to then be the basis for love of many different things. Now, it would seem that self-love is actually not there just existing when we're born or when we're raised. It doesn't seem like it's just there in that sense, just for us to tap into at any point. We're not sort of given it, I think, free of charge. We have to all locate, I would think, something that's genuine in ourselves that is actually truly lovable. I don't think this kind of thing can be manufactured on the spot. We can't just say, oh, today I'm going to decide that this is what I'm going to form the basis of my self-love, or this thing or that thing. And it also can't be based on something that we could easily lose overnight, things like money or certain titles, because then that's obviously very unstable. And the more secure and stable the anchoring of self-love is, the better it will be, as it's more likely to endure longer, it'll be a stronger reservoir that we can sort of dig into as we go about the world, loving various people and objects and friends and all those sorts of things. So for all those reasons, I think we should really focus on self-love, which we'll do today. Now, self-love, again, is a virtue. It requires some work to attain. And what's so difficult about this virtue is that, I think particularly difficult about this virtue, is that the effort to locate something that in the self that is actually lovable, that's worthy of anchoring self-love on, can very easily degenerate into certain vices of narcissism, for one, and another vice of unstable self-esteem. And here I want to briefly summarize the views of a leading psychologist. He's now passed away, on self-esteem. His name is Michael Kernis. Kernis was a psychology professor at the University of Georgia. And generally, I think there's a tendency for all of us to view any and all forms of self-esteem as good. Self-esteem just has a positive ring to it. And I think that was sort of a dominant view for many years, even in the psychological community. But Kernis seemed to dispute that notion, and Kernis seemed to draw very sharp distinctions between various forms of self-esteem, and he did not view all of them as equal, or even all of them as virtues or good for a human being at all. And the critical distinctions he made, he sort of divided self-esteem into sort of three variations, two of which he saw as vices. That would be narcissism and sort of the unstable self-esteem, and one of which he viewed as a virtue, which was stable self-esteem. Now, he's sort of summarizing Kernis's views on these different forms. Narcissism obviously is a word that we've heard a lot. Kern there's very many variations. Obviously, people can be narcissistic in many different ways, but Kern saw certain common characteristics, and those were that this kind of person sort of obviously and continuously puts down other people first, and then sort of excessively self-promotes himself, self-aggrandizes himself, feels superior to others and entitled to certain things. Ultimately, despite all these tactics, despite all these sort of efforts to create self-love, the narcissist's self-esteem is actually rather low. It's plagued by various forms of insecurity. It's unclear exactly what the narcissist is actually insecure about, but he or she adopts various tactics to boost self-esteem and protect it from attack. And those consist of perpetual self-promotion and self-aggrandizement, and at the same time leveling other people, putting other people down. The unstable self-esteem, again, for Kernus was a vice, and he saw that sort of the distinguishing character. Again, various forms it can take in many people, but the distinguishing characteristic, again, obviously, is the instability, the unstable self-esteem. The daily, weekly flow of events causes huge changes in this type of person's self-esteem. Person's self-esteem sort of bounces around all over the place. A good series of events, a good flow of news in a certain day or week causes a tremendous boost to this person's self-esteem. A bad series of events, a bad flow of data on a day-to-day basis causes depression and usually some sort of angry, hostile response in such a person. These types of people, Kernus emphasizes, tend to engage in activities mainly because they think it will result in sort of boost of their perception in the eyes of others. They sort of persist in the activity, even if they don't find it really worthwhile or valuable or interesting or drawing on their creativity or drawing on what they really wanted to do. But they persist in it because they think other people will value them, and this gives them sort of a boost to their self-esteem, because this person is very much preoccupied in how their actions are being interpreted by others, how good or poorly others believe he or she is doing in life. That's a sort of central concern of someone with unstable self-esteem. Unfortunately, again, despite all these efforts to do what is perceived to be as valuable by other people, despite this preoccupation with what other people will think about this kind of person, instability just continues to plague this type of person who has this kind of self-esteem, because fundamentally this person really has no control over sort of the flow of events that sort of we talked about in the various posts, how we all have so little control over what's happening in our world and sort of the day-to-day activities and the day-to-day results. We certainly can control our efforts, but beyond that, there's a lot of things that are sort of beyond our control. So all these things that are out of our control, the person that is pursuing this kind of self-esteem has little to no control over how things will turn out, little to no control over how people will actually judge their actions, even very well-intentioned actions and very even admirably driven actions. The person has no control over how people will judge and view their actions. And even at some level, the person it's unclear how long this person can continue to perform at the sort of the standard needed to continue to meet sort of very exacting standards, external standards that sort of feed the unstable self-esteem. There's sort of a theory that Kernus draws out that when someone's fundamental social needs are thwarted, they sort of seek to compensate for this thwarting by adapting strategies that result in the attainment of some self-esteem, even if it is the unstable variety. So if the fundamental social needs for friendship, for love, for good family relationships, for sort of self-identity creation, those are thwarted, there is this very quick transition, maybe not so quick, but there's a transition to try to compensate for the lack of that through the creation of unstable self-esteem. So those are the two vices, and then the key point, the virtue that Kernus prizes is obviously someone with stable self-esteem. And what distinguishes this person is that their feelings of self-worth are very secure, very well anchored. This person, their feelings of self-worth cannot easily be taken away by the sort of the flow of day-to-day events. It doesn't sort of bounce around all over the place based on what's happening on a day-to-day basis. Person does not need continual validation by other people. This person's feelings of self-worth are not sort of on the line all the time, as Kernus puts it. Person chooses his basic and dominant activities because he finds them intrinsically worthwhile to engage in. Sort of the dominant pursuits align perfectly with this person's freely chosen values. By continuing to do these dominant activities because they align so well with this person's freely chosen values, this process this is probably the most critical point that Kernus draws out. By continuing to do activities that he finds worthwhile or she finds worthwhile for freely chosen reason, this person sort of continually creates and builds and sort of in some sense prints a sort of stable self-esteem based on this sort of authentically chosen values and activities and actions based upon those values. And this whole process continues to create stable self-esteem in sort of a self-perpetuating good way. Person ends up liking himself, sort of warts and all. This person's not perfect, but still ends up liking all the different aspects of his personality. He certainly doesn't self-promote or react with any sort of anger or hostility, because again, the self-esteem is very well anchored, very stable, not on the line, so to say. Person will, of course, interestingly, is not sort of totally impervious to the flow of events. It will obviously be happy when things go well and sort of disappointed when things go poorly, but these are sort of temporary reactions. The sort of events that happen on a day-to-day basis don't in any way sort of change this person's fundamental perception of their worth as a human being. It's tempting to think of this person, because Kernus talks about this so much, of sort of authentically chosen values and freely chosen values, as having sort of different values from everyone. And that's actually not true. The person can actually share many of the same values as other people, but does so not on the mere fact that other people have adopted these values, but because he or she freely regards these values as being valuable to his life, sort of independently, like actually sees the value for himself or herself, not just because he wants to sort of appear that he's following the rules or shares the same values, so he's well liked by other people. It's sort of a more it's coming to the same realization as the group, that the values that the group is pursuing are actually good for that individual person. And so I think generally those are sort of Kernus's views on the virtues of stable self-esteem and the corresponding vices of narcissism and obviously unstable self-esteem. And in general, I find many of these views very well thought out, very rational. I think hardly anyone would freely choose to have the unstable rather than the stable self-esteem, although Kernus does emphasize that the sort of state of stable self-esteem is rare and is very difficult to attain, and it's sort of the optimal point. It's something that we should all sort of try to push and sort of attain, but it's not at all sort of the dominant, what we find most people, Kernus thinks, fit within sort of the unstable self-esteem. Their self-esteem, it bounces around a lot and is really dependent on meeting some sort of evaluative meeting some sort of expectation that's sort of externally imposed or externally driven. And so I think his ideas are actually pretty well thought out and rational. And I think given the choice, I think we all should choose to pursue stable self-esteem rather than unstable self-esteem for almost self-evident reasons. But I think for many self-evident reasons, and particularly for the reason that I don't think it's good for a human being for his or her sense of self-worth to be continually sort of bounced around like a ball in a lottery thing that they draw. That's sort of like going around in a circle, or you can think of ice hockey or whatever the image you want to use. I don't think someone's self-esteem should vary that much and fluctuate. I think it's very dangerous, and I think it's very dangerous when that happens. I think once we move beyond sort of basic childhood and adolescence and even young adulthood, I think an adult should have or should try to cultivate a sense of self-esteem that is not so driven by that is not so changing and unstable. Not the least of which the reason would be that if one's self-worth is so unstable, then that has sort of pretty bad consequences throughout one's life, for how one's friendships will go, and relationships and romantic relationships will go, how one can parenting responsibilities. If everything is sort of on the line every day, it seems like, as will inevitably happen, the days where things don't quite go as we please, or the events don't transpire as we please, shouldn't cause sort of that domino reaction. So I think it's pretty clear in my view that Kernis has appropriately distinguished between unstable, stable self-esteem and narcissism, and given us good reasons to think why we should pursue stable self-esteem. But still, I think there's probably some areas where I think we need to think more about these ideas and refine as we go through the different posts. And a few areas that I think may need some further work, sort of thought of three here. First, why should a person, Kernis sort of emphasizes that person ends up accepting himself, warts and all. I don't really accept that. If you recognize something as a wart, you should always try to get rid of it. It may be difficult, it may take time, it may be very complicated, but if you do fundamentally recognize it as bad, as not good for you, then you do need to make an effort to at least reduce it, maybe not completely eliminate it, but modulate and lower its, decrease its impact on your life. And so I don't agree with him on that point. And perhaps in a few rare cases, you just can't eliminate the wart. You tried your best, you just can't. But I think that is the rare case. I think the rare case where you actually try very diligently, and you try for an extended period. I think most people can eliminate most warts in that case. And so I think stable self-esteem, once we've attained it, should not be used as a shield by anyone to prevent efforts to continue to improve and eradicate vices in the self that exists. If it's used as a shield in this kind of way, where we say, "Oh, well, I've attained sort of this lasting this stable self-esteem, and I love myself, warts and all," it just seems to be in some ways an excuse as a cover-up for human laziness. So I don't agree with that aspect of it. The second question or concern I had is, are all sort of authentically chosen values equal to any other authentically chosen values? There may be a wide range of values that we could say are equally good, that people are equally free to pursue, and that it's just too hard to sort of choose that whether one is better than the other, or any of those questions. But there may be cases where a person has sort of authentically chosen values, but the values chosen make this person not even a decent person. There's lots of ways, I think, to answer sort of fundamental human questions and concerns and problems. As we saw in prior posts, there's probably no final solutions to any of those problems and concerns over the course of a human life. Life continues to change, you continue to change, your sort of facts about the world and the way you approach certain issues continue to change. So I don't think there's final solutions, but even so, and there's probably no perfectly right answers, but I still think there are good and better choices to those fundamental human questions. There's lesser, poorer choices, choices that just are not good for anyone involved. And under Kernis's theory, I think, I may have misunderstood it, but a person can have very high stable self-esteem, but not even be a decent human being. And that seems sort of unacceptable. A person under his theory, I think, can have a very high stable self-esteem that's authentic through authentically chosen values, but again, it's just not a decent human being. and that doesn't seem right. So I think the attainment of stable self-esteem should, of course, be an important goal in our life, but I don't think it should be the ultimate goal. It's something that I think it's very important to attain as we reach adulthood and young adulthood and maybe middle adulthood, but I don't think we should rest at its attainment and never move beyond it and just say, well, I've authentically chosen my values, I have these warts, and that's it, I'm done. So I don't think self-esteem should be viewed in that sense, or it's the best way of viewing the concept. And then finally, Curtis sort of alludes to it, but doesn't really expand on this notion, which I think is worthy of being expanded on. And that is that stable self-esteem can really be generated based on sort of, in addition to freely choosing values, it can be best generated by the challenges one has endured over the course of a life, and the courage one has shown to go through the various ups and downs of life up to this point. And this is something that I think if anyone looks back over their life, whether someone that's a narcissist or has unstable self-esteem or stable self-esteem, whoever it is, that we can all easily locate in our lives. Everyone can identify what a miracle in some sense, or how much has gone right, how much strength of spirit there's been for each person to get to where they are right now, to make it up to this point in your life in one piece and as a decent human being, more or less, up to the age of, let's say, 30 or 35 or 40. To make it to that point, I think, is obviously some sort of achievement in the world, particularly in our modern world with economic and various forms of competition that are ever increasing, various forms of political and social unrest that are sort of always around us, various values in flux, and sort of no sort of metaphysical certainties in the world about values, sort of everything sort of up in the air. And I think to have achieved through all that and persisted through all that, I think the self deserves proper credit. I think all our life histories are all different, but of course every life has had to endure incredible strain, tension, uncertainty, despair, doubt, disappointed hopes, even on a day-to-day basis. I mean, day-to-day basis, everyone has some share of those kinds of things. Hopefully a lot of good things too, but there's probably some of that in every day. And for the self to have endured years and years of that and days of that, and to have endured through it all, is perhaps the first place we should look to create this sort of stable self-esteem. Look back on our lives and actually look at all the things we've accomplished and all the challenges we've gone through and all the difficult moments we've survived and continue to grow and prosper and fight through things. And I think if we look closely back in our lives, there should be enough there to anchor a very, very strong sense of stable self-esteem. And that, of course, will be stable because our past is fixed, and no one can ever take away from us that we have survived and endured through all those things with resilience and with courage. And that's not something that needs any sort of anyone else to agree with us on. That doesn't need any sort of, and it's not something that anyone can take from us. So I think as a way to create stable self-esteem, focusing on all the things that we've endured on and focusing on all the resilience we've shown over the years is a pretty good bet there. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.